So a common question I receive from wives is that they're often led to have sexual intercourse pretty quickly when they're intimate with their spouses. There's rarely any foreplay. So the woman is not getting her needs met, and she's feeling almost like she's being used to pleasure her husband and receive very little in return. So I would love to hear your perspectives on this topic since it is quite common within marriages.
Sure. In general, that's not how we would approach the prophetic guidance regarding the intimate act between a married couple. The Prophet, peace be upon him, advised men to send a messenger or a message to the spouse, i.e., foreplay, and to also not prounce upon their spouse the way an animal does. So the idea is that foreplay is an integral part of the sexual act. Sending a message, literally sending a message, or the acts that lead to that. That also teaches us a couple of things that I think are important to bear in mind. That intimacy with the spouse is not, in Islam, is not reduced to the sexual act, but it's a whole package, and there are many components to it. The other thing is that in other traditions, the Prophet, peace be upon him, told us to be merciful to our men, to be merciful to their wives. And he said, for example, خيركم خيركم لأهلي وأنا خيركم لأهلي. The best of you are those who are best in kindness to their women, and I am the best of you towards their women. So there's an extra burden for the man specifically to approach this gently. Now, that being said, I'm not saying that this is a hard and fast rule all the time. I mean, maybe there are instances where, I'm just making this up, time is short, or there's this desire that the man has or something like that. So if it's a one-off thing, I wouldn't be concerned. But if this is the pattern, I think I would be concerned, and that's where my previous comments, I think, would be important. But that's just one aspect to it. Share with me, so how do you deal with this? What are your thoughts on this issue?
So oftentimes, if it's a repeated concern, then I often want to understand the context of why this is happening. So oftentimes, the husband may have a lot of focus on his gratification, and his perspective of sex may not be fully informed from an Islamic paradigm. So there's this idea, well, I have sexual rights and I've been abstinent this long in my life. So my wife is there for me to receive gratification. And I love you once said that sometimes sexual rights sounds like a business contract in marriage, but we're not really understanding that we have responsibilities towards our spouse. And if we are treating our spouses in a way that takes away their dignity and God-given right to pleasure, then we have to revisit that. So I would want to find out what's the root cause. Sometimes it's misunderstanding Islamic paradigm, sometimes it's pornography exposure, and they're being programmed to really focus on male pleasure. Sometimes it's not having the skills. They don't know how to ask their wives, what would you like? What feels good in terms of me giving you foreplay and pleasure? So it can be a number of things, but those are the most common challenges I find in terms of the root causes of why this is happening.
Also you reminded me of something else, which is there are cultural differences. So there are some cultures which will teach a man that, what you just said, that your job's wife is to fulfill your sexual desires. And by the way, those same cultures are also teaching women that that's their job. So maybe there's a cultural understanding out there that is more tolerant of this. But we're speaking in English. We live in the West. I think most people, both of us know, and we've dealt with, including ourselves, we don't accept that. That's not our cultural understanding of the relationship. We'll use words like partners. That it's not husband and wife, but we're partners, in building this family. So also the cultural understanding is important, because the Sharia sets a certain standard and gives us guidelines, but those guidelines and standards are applicable to all of those cultural manifestations. So sometimes when Muslim couples come together with these type of issues, if we're the ones offering advice, we need to be able to ascertain as well their cultural background to see why they are doing that. So if somebody came to me with a similar cultural background as me and said, my wife's job is to fulfill my sexual desire, I'll be like, no, that's not cool, because I know that I can connect with that person on that culture. But at the same time, if somebody from another cultural background came to me, I can't negate their cultural understanding, because that's just, I have to try to deal with it a slightly different way. and bring it back more to the spirit of the Sharia, etc. So I just wanted to also add that because I think it's important with this specific issue.
Very much so. I think we are seeing more intercultural couples that are getting married now, and oftentimes, like you said, it's so important that we bring it back to what's common between us, which is Islam. And I think setting that as the foundation and understanding the spirit of why certain revelations were revealed is very important, because that can often be the beginning to unlearning and then relearning accurate perspectives. Because oftentimes culture and religion in the East are like this, and they're often confused. So we want to be able to tease apart, hey, you know, what is revelation and what is Sharia, and then what is culture. So it's a very delicate process, as you said.
One last thing I'd add to this is I think, I mean, being a man, so thinking of how men think about things oftentimes is that we are very immediate in the here and now.
Yes.
And I think what we don't realize is that what you're going to do now with your wife will oftentimes manifest many, many, many days and hours and weeks later. And this idea of the dominance, that one is dominant over the other, there really is no Islamic foundation for that. It's responsible. We're spiritually equal, but functionally different. We have different functions in life. Sometimes those functions overlap 100%. Sometimes I mean, I can't have children. Obviously, that's not a function that I was given. But the idea that one dominates the other, I think, is the root of the problem. And I think what men need to realize is if they're going to approach their marriage that way with dominance, it's like you're putting pressure here, but it will manifest down the line in another way, from another angle, and you weren't even considering. So many times that attitude of demanding the sex now without the intimacy part will put stress on the relationship that will manifest in other ways. And I think that men need to think about that and reconsider this idea of the male dominated relationship in the husband-wife relationship.
Absolutely. Such an important point that I think young single Muslims really need to be reflecting on as well.
I agree.